Sir, it's good to see you, man. How have you been?
I've been really good, man. The quarantine's been good for making music, although I'm definitely ready to be back out and playing shows. So that started to happen a little bit. And but life is good, and it's good to be back on, a podcast that I really enjoyed.
Oh, good, man. I'm glad. I was just listening back to our conversation this morning that we did on the podcast a couple of years ago, and I had remembered that it was good, but listening back, I was like, man, this was like, that was a really nice conversation, man. I still remember it too, like being there in that room, right, that we're looking at.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. The same room. Yeah, you were here, man.
Yeah, that was super fun, man. Well, I appreciate you coming back on. It's funny to hear you talk about, getting back to shows and having fun with that, because I think when we talked last time, it kind of sounded like you were a little burnt out on shows, probably because you had been going for, years at that point without a stop. But has it actually been nice to come back to it now? Do you feel like you have a different relationship with touring?
Yeah, it's new and it's fresh and exciting. And I got to say that I really enjoyed the quarantine for all the reasons you just described, to be able to take a break from the constant performing and to make music and do all these other things that I'm passionate about. So yeah, all those things that were stressing me out that I vented to you, they were kind of assuaded by the quarantine. So it was nice. Yeah.
Well, that's good, man. Yeah. Has it been like now back on the road? Are you enjoying it more than you did?
Yeah, I would say definitely. Yeah. There's still things about being on the road that are tough. Just, could be a bit lonely, but to be honest, we've just popped in and out of cities for a couple of shows here and there. So, will I be like terminally depressed in a few months, right? When we're in full swing? I can't say. I'm not sure.
Yeah, of course, man. Well, and another thing you had talked about when we last talked was that, with the constant touring, it's hard to kind of get into a consistent production routine, which is, something that I know is very important to you as well. Do you think, was this enough time in the pandemic? I mean, obviously you put out the album. We'll talk about the whole thing, but do you feel like you've also established a different relationship to production at this point?
Yeah. I mean, the album was this amazing way for me to get out so much that I wanted to do musically. Like I wanted to take a break from just doing dance floor fillers, 128 type of stuff, and do music that I would like to listen to. When I'm riding the car, I found myself, not listening to a lot of my own music because in most settings it didn't work. Unless I was on stage, it didn't work. And with the album, I had so much fun just creating musical, explorational stuff that I knew was inside of me, but in the midst of touring and just trying to stay afloat with the output of the songs, it was hard to make music that was experimental. At times, it would even feel irresponsible with the little time that I had between shows to make something that was explorational and different than what my fans were used to. But with the album, I was able to just really dive into it. And, now that I've done it, I do feel a little bit like shit. It's a bit hard to get excited, going back to just one-off singles.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But, I do feel like I dumped everything that I had in terms of inspiration and creativity into the album. And now I'm just trying to pick it back up, and get excited about it again. But I sit down in front of Ableton and sometimes I'm just like, fuck, man, like I'd rather be doing anything else, honestly.
Well, yeah, that's really interesting to hear you say it, because you tell me if I'm right or wrong, but my mental image of you is that, you're kind of always the guy who's always in front of Ableton, always working on something, whether it's, a song or a sample pack or, that's my impression of you, is like kind of your happy place is when you're making something.
Yeah, definitely making something. It's just that's something, after the album became other things than music. Like I got back into making games, which is something that I really liked to do when I was a kid. So I picked that back up, and I started to like just being outside generally more, which is ironic because in the quarantine everyone's supposed to be inside. But
Right.
I did it in a safe, isolated way. But I started to just really appreciate hanging out with my friends, throwing a ball around, working on these games, learning After Effects. Like in the last music videos that I put out, I either did all the effects or collaborated on all the effects. So that was just really fun to learn something creative that wasn't music, because you know how many times I've sat and looked at Ableton? It's been like a bazillion times, a lot of times, you know. So I still had all this energy, you know, to be creative and to be working. It's just after the album, I really needed a break. I'm starting to get back into music and enjoying being in front of Ableton now, but I needed a big break.
I mean, that makes sense to me, man. And I think that's, you know, for anybody who's watching this now or listening back later, I think that's a great tip for creativity in general. If you're feeling sort of at a dead end with your main thing, there's so many other ways to be creative and to sort of exercise that muscle without feeling like you just have to keep repeating the same thing that you don't feel like doing, you know?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think if you like making music, well, if you like making electronic music, especially, you're probably already kind of nerdy inclined, and you'd have, I think, an easy transition into things like visual effects and making games. You know, I mean, a lot of songs when you make electronic music are almost like logic puzzles of like, well, okay, this section, you know, had these drums. Now the next section should probably pick up in some way, and then the melody should pick up in some way and get bigger. And you're essentially problem solving, which, if that is a satisfying endeavor for you, I think it applies to visual effects and it applies to video games. I think that's my main thing is solving puzzles, you know, and music is like a super complicated puzzle, and it's a really enchanting puzzle because there's no right answer, right? But you know something is good when you hear it. There's never a right answer. So it's like a puzzle, but in some sort, it's like in the ether. It's
like a puzzle in some, you know, that exists in some fourth dimension we can't see, where there's multiple solutions. There's no one right way to do it.
Yeah.
But there is, you know, you've had the satisfaction of solving it. So you know that solution is out there, you know?
Yes. Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting, man. I mean, I think even the super nerdy technical stuff, you know, the engineering, the mixing of it, that's another puzzle too, right? This frequency range is, you know, is too barren, or there's too much going on in it, and I need to make room for these other things I want to put in.
Yeah.
The whole thing is kind of gamified. You're right.
Yeah. And you have to appreciate that aspect to be a producer. If you just want things to sound good, you're going to be pissed off, you know? You're going to be pissed.
Yeah, that's true too.
Yeah.
Well, and you were saying, you know, you as a kid, you used to like code kind of simple games. Were you a gamer growing up? Do you consider yourself a gamer in general?
Well, now I feel like the word gamer is sort of inextricable from, you know, like Call of Duty or these really intense, you know, fighting or shooting games. But I was definitely a gamer, mostly for RPGs. That was my main thing. So my favorites were like the original Fallouts back when they were still 2D, isometric view. And Final Fantasy VII is probably like my favorite game of all time. So yeah, I was definitely a gamer, and I was definitely just like a computer geek before music ever rolled around. I was making games in Flash. So with ActionScript, which is, you know, discontinued basically now, but yeah, that's where I started. Now I'm using something called Stencil, and I really recommend it to anyone trying to get into programming. It's not even really like difficult coding. You get blocks of code and you just sort of assemble them as you go. And when something, you know, you might have a problem in the game, like your guy falls down, but then he can keep moving, right? Like he still moves left and right when you hit the key. And so you realize that you didn't tell the computer that he can't move if he's falling down. So the whole thing becomes like a big logic problem, almost like a math proof, where it's like, 2 times 2 is 4, but you have to prove it and you have to cover all your bases because this machine doesn't have the same human intuition that you do about the way things move. So you have to describe the world you're envisioning in this incredibly articulate and foolproof way. And then when everything works, it's like eureka. It's so satisfying.
Yeah.
So it's really fun. I've really gotten back into it.
No, that's cool, man. And I think there's something in there too that I think has to do with your attention to detail. And I was kind of wondering about this earlier today. Like, do you have a sense of where that comes from like both the programming, this, you have to be so specific and accurate, even down to like the way you make your sample packs. Like, I know, you put in so much more work and spend so much more time, I think, than most artists who make sample packs. Like, there's this attention to detail in everything you do. And I don't know. I don't know where that comes from.
Well, so when I was young, I had a lot of problems in school because I would get too stuck on one thing. That was always the issue that my teachers brought up to my parents, that, and I was got into this one thing, but then we were supposed to switch to math, or we were supposed to switch to English, and he just wanted to keep doing whatever, the arts and crafts or something we were doing. It was always very difficult for me to switch between things, and that was really frustrating because I felt like I could do well, come up with something special if I just kept honing one particular effort, but instead I ended up doing really bad in school, or it was at least always a struggle for me. But I think in the long run, that ended up being a pro because I have this sort of relentless ability to keep on scratching away at something until something beautiful is unearthed from it. So I think that detail is probably, it's just a weird tick that I have. I don't get fatigued to continue working on one thing. And in fact, it's difficult for me to switch throughout the day. Like, people will tell you that you should take a break or you should work on something else and then come back to this thing so you have a better perspective. And I've always really struggled with that because my inclination is always to just keep on. Sometimes it's the same 2 bars, 4 bars. And if you're in the same room with me, you just think I was fucking insane, just hacking away at the same. So that's where I think the detail thing comes from. And then in regards to the sample packs have been really nice, fun. They're a fun break because with songs, as I'm sure you know, it is like giving birth, right? Like, making a song is this big investment, and halfway through making the song, you're not even sure why you like the song. You're like, that's why a lot of people don't finish things, right? It's because you're excited at first, and then all the work that goes into finishing it, by the time you're there, you like forget why you even liked it. Now with the sample packs, you just have to make a little loop, a little idea. Okay, that sounded cool. Render it, and you're on to the next one. So it's a lot of really nearby goalposts that you can keep checking off, and it's
like
inspiring.
A mini game, right? It's like a mini game, kind of. Right.
Yeah. It's like making little mini songs, right? So it's like you're getting that serotonin boost all the time.
That's a really good way to look at it. I mean, it makes me think about, talking about the attention to detail and how that was maybe like an issue for you at school because you would get too focused. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately is, everybody has something that can be a hindrance or a help depending on how you look at it,
Yeah.
Whereas maybe your teachers would get frustrated with you in school because you couldn't switch subjects quick enough, or you weren't sort of learning the way they wanted you to learn. You managed to flip that into something now that is, I think a big advantage that you have in the music career. And it's just something I've been thinking about with regards to production in general and making music, that we all have these sort of tendencies that if we stop fighting them and lean into them and try to figure out how we can make them work for us, sometimes not sometimes, always, that's kind of like the only way to deal with them, as opposed to trying to sort of struggle against these tendencies or these things we don't like about ourselves.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, that's honestly probably the key to life, right? Is to have an objective understanding about you and the way that you work, and then to make the most of it. There was a class that I did a while back where I pulled up these like archetypes of dance music, and I think I put Kygo and Skrillex in this category of these guys sort of innovated a sound, and I think they'll always be cemented in the scene for that. And then you had guys like Diplo or DJ Khaled, which, Khaled falls like more extremely into this category where maybe they're not like the nerdy hands-on, sitting there in front of a computer for 12 hours in a row kind of guys, but they have a great understanding of culture and relationships and what really moves people and what affects people with music. And they know how to get the right people together to make the right songs happen. And that's playing on a different strength. And, there are those out there who would be really critical of someone who's not so hands-on. And you see it in the YouTube comments. Oh, he did 95% and this guy did 5% or whatever. But, that's just their strength. And my strength is, on the spot, I don't know how impressive I would be if you told me to come up with something like right now or come up with a witty comeback if we got in a, one of those fight, people get like, yo mama this, and, I wouldn't do so well in that, but I do feel confident that if given enough time, I could sort of engineer a world that is really special through music. So yeah, that works for me, and for others, it could be something else, but I think everybody has a shot at being successful and doing special things. It's just, sometimes we get caught up in all the things that we're not, and that can bring us down. And we see other people around us succeeding because they are making the most of their tool set. And we compare ourselves to them. We feel crappy because we're not like them as much as we'd like to be. And that can get you down. But if you're able to frame it differently and, look at what your strengths are, then I think you have equal shot as anybody to succeed.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And, some of those people you just mentioned, the Diplos, the DJ Khaleds, the Skrillexes of the world, I think one thing they all share, and I would extend this to you absolutely as well, is, what they do it very authentically. Like there's not much that's manufactured about what they do. It's, everything they're putting out there seems to be a pretty true representation of who they are and just how they perceive the world. Like it's not, none of it seems very calculated. You know what I mean? And I think that's a big key too, is that you have to have, it's sort of weird, especially if you're a new artist. I don't know if you have any thoughts about this. If you're a new artist, you have to have this weird combination of like this total self-confidence and belief in, whatever you're doing, these weird ideas you're trying, you don't know if they're going to work out. You have to sort of stand behind them. But then at the same time, you have to understand that you're probably not going to be that good at first, right?
Yeah.
So it's this weird balance you have to strike. And it's sort of hard to tell people that, because you don't want to fall into thinking that your shit is better than it is. You want to have some perspective, but you also want to be able to say, well, no, I like myself. I like my ideas. I'll get there.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, because I think that the people who are crazy enough, to believe that they're the shit, even before they're the shit, it ends up becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy more often than those who are really gifted or really smart, but don't have that same belief. Sometimes people are so smart that they're smart enough to question themselves at every turn, right? Like in science, people often like to say the more you know, the more you realize how little you know. And as true as that may be, and how as sophisticated as that may sound, it's not a great recipe for success, because you're not as bold. And if I'm looking back at when I started, if I knew everything that I knew now and I saw how much gray there was in it all, I probably wouldn't have the confidence to embark on this big journey. It took a lot of naivete, and it took a lot of just being young and not knowing shit, just to think that I could do it. But in the process of all that, I managed to scrape something together. I think that You know that what's the word I'm looking for? Is you're just a dreamer. You're kind of what's so delusional. That delusion.
Yeah, I know that word. Yeah.
yeah. Sorry, just wasn't there for me that time. But that delusion, is often looked at as a bad thing. But entitlement, which is also looked at as a bad thing, I think gets you really far in life. Like the same kid who shows up to a doctor and asks him questions and doesn't feel like he's not able to ask a doctor questions just because he's an adult, just because he's a person of status. That same kid who isn't afraid to ask questions, I think goes on to become someone who succeeds because they never looked at, a politician as someone they couldn't be, as someone different than them, or a doctor. They looked at them all as human beings. And when you look at them that way, then you're not really afraid of what it could take to get there. You haven't put them in some other bracket that's different from your own.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, I think it's one of those ironies of life, right? That the older you get, the more you realize that kind of no one knows what they're doing, and we're all kind of making it up together. But when you're young, it's hard to understand that and to have that confidence just because you haven't seen enough, experienced enough. You don't have that wisdom. It's like by the time we die, that's when we're old enough to realize that we didn't know anything the whole way through.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people who are very far into their field, you ask them a question like, are space and time the same thing? And then a scientist will be like, well, no, they're different, but they are related, and gravity tugs on them in the same way. Since Einstein did have a compelling argument, it's like you're not groundbreaking anymore. Everything is gray. You know all the arguments, so you would never be so ignorant as to take a big stand that you think any one thing is the right idea. As we get older, we like to just point out to the bold, people that how ignorant they're being. But it's the bold people who make a difference and I think pioneer things. So yeah, it's I think all the people that I've seen that early on, I was like, how could you believe in yourself? Your music is shit,
Right.
But those guys stuck with it and ended up, having music that was less and less shit until they had music that was really great. And then there's one guy in particular I'm thinking of is DJ Carnage.
I was just about to bring him up, man.
Because way before and I do think he's good at making music, by the way, but way before he's good at making music, that guy had just this unbelievable belief in himself, and I think it carried him to where he is today.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true, man. And we talked about him for a second the last time you were on this podcast too, and you were talking about how he always had this self-belief in himself. And from what you're saying, you were somewhat the same way, maybe a little less outwardly loud about it than Carnage. But what was it early on? Because I think the last time we talked, and for anybody watching this or listening back later, by the way, this is Kashmir's second appearance on this podcast. We ran through the whole hero's journey, the backstory on the last episode. So you can always go back and check that as well. But I don't think we really talked about what was it about music that drew you in? Why was that the thing you connected with, more than school, more than maybe what your parents were telling you should focus on? Like, was there a light bulb moment?
Early on, my real love for music came out of just being really angry, I think. I went through a tough time when my parents split up, and I had a lot of frustration and a lot of anger that I wanted to vent, and music was my place for doing that. So listening to, Korn, Marilyn Manson, and then getting into hip hop like Tupac and Eminem. And, nothing spoke to me the way that music did. And that was, for me, a sign that it was something I wanted to make people feel that way. But before music, I would look at things like I was really into football. I wanted to be a football player when I was really young. And I tried to start a league with my friends. And I had something about me as a kid. Whenever I liked something, I wanted to then do it myself. And I wanted to put together, do adult sort of. I was trying to do my best impression of an adult, basically. Right. And with music, I think it was accessible in the sense that, wait, CDs, burning CDs was becoming a thing. Like, wow, before my music was any good, by the way, I would, try to make a song and then burn it to a CD and then go to school and be like, yo, listen, I made this song. And the whole act from beginning to finish of having this thing that I made, putting my name on it. And, it was another way of me acting beyond my years probably at the time. And there's something I loved about being able to do something without needing help from adults. And, before even the musical side of it, I think I liked that whole process and what that meant for my identity,
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think about the programming your own games too, right? Like you just had to get inside of whatever your interest was.
Yeah, because I was a lover of games, and then how do you make these things? Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's hard for me to understand people who don't look at the things that they really like and wonder how they were made. Like one thing I always get into with my mom about, and I have a great relationship with my mom, love her to death. She was a cellist, but if I ask her like, okay, well, why did you play a G sharp here, but then later modulated, now it's a G or something? And she would never interested her to know the why. And some people are just like that, but it's always been hard for me to understand the people who, they're probably happier people, honestly, because I'm over here, with this like complex, like I need to figure it out, I should be able to figure this out. And,
right.
It's a lot of stress as opposed to just accepting things in life.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a theory that that all creative people, not just music, but anybody who does anything creative also needs to still be a fan of something, still like kind of have something as a hobby or as a fan perspective.
Yeah.
Just because, that's how we all got into it in the first place. And I try to, at least for myself, I try to keep that connection to something where I can just like it, enjoy it, watch it, and not participate, even if I want to. I don't know. I do think there's some value there just because, that's how we all started, was like just seeing something cool and wanting to see more of it. I think it helps me creatively to have something where I'm like, no, I'm not going to participate. I'm just going to enjoy. And then I'll go back to all the other shit that I do, maybe with a little more inspiration.
Right. Yeah. It is really a gift and a curse to get so deep into something that you love, because you're slowly taking all the magic out of it for yourself. Like a magician, doesn't show you a trick. And I heard one magician say, it's for you guys. I don't show it for you guys because it's never going to be magic to you again if I show it to you,
Right.
And being a musician, God, I mean, you have to do what you said, and you have to force yourself to just be a fan, and then also to make it. And like, how do you still look at something as magic when you've literally dissected it to every atom it's comprised of, and still believe that it's magic and see it for magic, which is the way that you want people to perceive it? It's a tough one.
It is really a tough one. I mean, I'll put this in front of you. You tell me what you think. Thinking about the Harmonica Andromeda album that you did, was that a way for you to kind of recapture that sort of spirit? Because not only is it, slightly different styles of music than you had been doing previously, in incorporating different influences that maybe you hadn't done before. So it's like new ideas, but then also there's like this storytelling element of it, right? That doesn't even necessarily have to be musical at all. Like you're exercising a different creative muscle that way, in terms of, there's actually a backstory. There's a story arc. We were just talking about the videos that you were sort of contributing ideas to. And in that way, like turning it into this whole like concept rather than just you working on a song, right?
Yeah, right. And does that keep it magical? Is that the question?
Yeah, kind of? I guess so.
Yeah.
I mean, did it for you, or did it just make it more complicated?
Well, I think I've tried to imagine story in a lot of the music that I've made. So to be fair, some of the songs I've done, is there a story in it? Yeah, it's a stretch, but I've definitely tried to do that with the music I really care about the most. And with this album, that was absolutely the case. There's usually a point with each song where I'm sort of seeing a movie in my head. And that's so great because it helps inform all the musical decisions, the instrument selection decisions that would fit into this world that's already started to take its own life. So that is kind of magic to me. And anyone who makes music, I will tell you, there's a point where it just starts to become its own thing. And it's your job to not fuck it up. You can add to it and you can add some sprinkles and you can try to emphasize the different components of this world where it's like, is it the jungle or is it the Wild West or wherever? These are things that I've played on in the album. But your job is mainly not to fuck it up. And you're trying to just stay true and genuine, authentic to that world and have as much fun with it as you can. So that part is great, especially with the album where, to make it fun and to make it take twists and turns and also be at tempos that I'm not used to doing and really almost exclusively using acoustic instruments as opposed to synths. It was challenging. And, that's another thing about keeping it magical to you as the creator. It's that a lot of that is in the challenge of it. If you feel yourself repeating things that you've already done, things that you're already good at, the magic is probably not going to be there for you. Now, if it's new and challenging to you, it doesn't always equate with being exciting for the listener, but it's a good step in the right direction,
right.
I think.
Yeah. And it might not even feel fun at the time to challenge yourself, but it does get you closer to those exciting moments of discovery, which is like what, got us all excited about this in the first place, right?
Exactly, right? It's kind of like, if you remember in chemistry class, you'd have water, you're applying heat to the water, and the temperature keeps going up, and then the temperature flatlines for a while, even though you're applying heat. And it seems like you're making no progress, but really it's transforming into gas, right?
Yeah.
And in that plateau, when you're taking the time to experiment and try new things, you might feel no progress at all, but you have to have that belief that that's how you're going to get to the next phase. It's going to, that's how you're going to gas.
Yeah. You got to gas yourself up, baby.
Yeah. And, the more successful you get or the longer you've been doing it, you're very attached to that feeling of, I'm good at something. And you have to humble yourself a bit and be willing to suck for a while in order to break through to a new level that will be challenging and exciting for you all over again. It's never over. I think you've always got, you'll find a wave, you'll ride it, and then you've got to find the next one. And you've got to appreciate that whole process.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah. It's reinvention and riding the waves, all of that. For anyone who's sustained a long career in music, people have to reinvent themselves so many times over. You have to fall in and out of love with what you do a million times. Especially for artists with long careers, I don't know if people understand really what that love affair is like, because there's a lot of low points in between the high points that people see, right?
Yeah, dude. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and another thing about the album I wanted to talk about is that it also seemed like musically you went back to some older versions, some older reinventions of yourself. And I'm talking about, there's pop influences, there's hip hop influences, there's different tempos. You mentioned, using the different instruments and different production methods as well. Was some of that leaning on what you learned when you were part of the Cataracts? Was some of that inspired? Did any of it feel familiar to kind of go back and work those muscles?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. The hip hop was majority of my producing career. And when I started KSHMR, I really didn't want anybody to compare the two. And so that's why first I didn't show my face and made really no mention of the Cataracts and really wanted KSHMR to be its own thing. And with the album, after having stayed so true to this KSHMR thing and what I think it means, and it's very specific, and here's all the things I don't do, here's all the things I do, I wanted to give people more of just like an all-encompassing view of who I am as an artist. because that would be new at this point. Going back to when I started Kashmir, something new meant abandoning all that stuff. But like we said, it's cyclical, and now it felt new with the album to have hip hop in it and some pop, and that was, I think a step towards a little more vulnerability and more of a naked look into me as a person, because they're all things that I like, but they're things that I shied away from because I wanted the branding of Kashmir to be very specific.
Sure.
But as time goes on, I think that for my fans, the best thing that I could do for them is probably give them a more naked look at just everything that makes up who I am.
Yeah, I think that's what we were talking about earlier about authenticity and, those producers who are not necessarily known for one sound, but it's, people just follow them more or less because of their perspective, their brain, right? And whatever they do, they're kind of embraced because it's coming from them. I actually saw, it's interesting you say that, because when I was reading some interviews of yours earlier today and listening back to the conversation we had a couple years ago, and I'm paraphrasing, but you were giving advice to producers, and you said something to the lines of, the best advice I can give is that you have to always display your full self, put your personality on display, be authentic, that kind of thing. And then I realized, so Kashmir for me, I think of, cinematic music. I think of storytelling. I think of, seeing visuals while you're listening to the music, that kind of thing. And I wanted to ask, is that your personality? Like, is the cinematic thing, where does that come from?
It's funny. I think that, to be more accurate, I would say for somebody first starting out, I don't think you need to show your whole self. I think that you should try to get an understanding of what's unique about yourself and the different influences that you have, which maybe are unlikely to find in a single person. Yeah. Maybe you are into, EDM, but you also are from Hawaii, and like you grew up on all the crazy flutes and Hawaiian choirs, that kind of cool stuff. And that could be your angle at first to sort of bottle up something that makes you unique and have that be your angle. So I think you can cut through better with a more pointed vision for yourself before you allow people to see everything that makes, that's ever influenced you, or everything that you think you're capable of, to try to pinpoint it to something a bit specific, but still unique, but specific, and ride that out for a while until you cut through all of the fat of everybody who's trying to be heard in the music scene. But yeah, for me, when I started Kashmir, I thought it would be really exciting to bring something cinematic and dark to the table, and of course play on my Indian roots as well. But yeah, having this idea of sort of a movie and a story playing out probably first came to me in my early days going to raves and looking at the DJ. And in my head, I almost saw him like this general in front of a big army. And then there were some songs that came out of that, some sort of very marchy kind of songs. And that was the first way, I was able to break into the scene. And then later, more stuff that was, Indian leaning, I think took me to a new level and probably defined who I am. Next to the cinematic stuff, I'd say they're probably equal, the Indian influence and the cinematic. And they're absolutely two things that I just, are a big part of me. And also when I looked at the scene, I felt like that would be so cool to add to the scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're talking about things that certainly don't get represented in that way, the way you're talking about it very often in the dance music scene. Especially here in the States, for sure. And it's, talking about your Indian heritage as well. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that. Earlier today, I watched that little Back to My Roots mini documentary. Cool. That you made about, your relationship with your father and your grandfather, and the time you spent with them in India. And I kind of wanted to ask, the last podcast we did together, you were saying how the Indian side of your family maybe didn't get what you were trying to do at the start with music.
Yeah.
and that, but of course now obviously they love it and embrace it. But for you, like, what did being Indian, the idea of, having an Indian identity, what did it mean to you when you were starting off music, and how has that idea changed over time?
Yeah. So when I was starting off making music, I don't think I thought, like, in the very beginning, thought about it a lot. And in fact, probably early on in my childhood, you know, my dad was a guy with a funny accent, and I wanted to fit in, and I think I probably tried to downplay that side of me, as much as I could, because I wanted to, fit in. So it was probably later in life where, it I realized how important India was to me. I mean, I had grown up going to India, and then also my family coming from India to visit us. But if you don't know anything else, that just feels like normal life. You
Yeah.
don't think like, wow, this is some special, piece of my heritage that I want to do all this research into now and identify with. It was, I think, later in life when I was debating going to college and they sent me to India to live with my grandpa, because I really didn't want to go to college. I was very set on music. Um, and they had me go stay with him, and I had like no return ticket pretty much. So we just went and saw all the temples, went all over India, and it made me, I think, feel this like sudden sense of relationship with India more. And coming back to America, I had like this sense of determination, I guess, because I saw, how they were doing out in India, and, how people got by. And I'm not trying to do the classic, like, oh, they have it so bad. Of course, it's like, it is rough compared to America. But I was able to collect my thoughts, I think, a lot, and have a sense of identity, and came back to America, and really wanted to just hit the ground running and drive a spear, through these dreams that I had of music, which is ironic because, the whole point of me going to India was for them to persuade me that music would just be a hobby.
Right.
So yeah, they fought me on it, and it was, I'd say, really tough. There were a lot of times where I would be crying because, my dad was very math minded, and he would get frustrated with me. I wasn't understanding things, and I just didn't care about school that much. And it was so disappointing to him, and he'd get so angry, and he'd be yelling, and my grandpa the same. And, it was a really sucky period in my life where I found myself crying a lot and just being really angry and resentful and wanting to rebel because I believed in this thing so much. I wanted to do it so bad. And I just felt like I was disappointing everybody,
Mm.
So it
Yeah,
was tough.
that can be tough, man. It's
Yeah.
one of those advantages that I don't think gets talked about a lot when you're just starting off. Like, whether or not you have a super strong support system, that
Yeah.
can mean so much when you're just starting off and you don't have a fan base yet. You don't have that outside affirmation that, you're onto something and you're not crazy and all
Yeah.
that. That can be really tough, man. I mean, I'm glad you pushed through it. I would imagine they are too.
Yeah. I know. No, they are now. It's yeah, it's kind of it, for my relationship with my dad, for instance, I mean, if you had a kid and you fought him on something, pretty much the whole way, and then it worked out, you'd be happy, but you might be weird for you a little bit too,
Oh, for sure. Well,
Yeah.
especially with what we do, I think anybody who does dance music, like dance music is still a relatively young art form, right? And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think people from an older generation, there's just no frame of reference to even understand exactly what's happening, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. It's weird, right? Like, what do you play? The computer, I
Right.
guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's always my answer. I play a little piano, but yeah, mostly the computer. And that is hard to wrap your head around. But that's a generational thing. And I think for anybody who has Indian parents, you know that it's also like a cultural thing. And it's probably born out of, a fear that you'll be a nobody and you'll struggle for the rest of your life. And that's a legitimate fear. So, I don't fault them for it. And to be honest, if everybody was super kumbaya about me making music, maybe it wouldn't have worked out,
Yeah.
maybe that sense of insecurity and feeling constantly like I needed to prove myself and I had to work so hard at this because nobody was going to clap for me unless I was like, a complete, success that you could give, it was tangible success. And you really needed to convince all these people. If I thought that everyone would just be happy with, oh yeah, and how's his music? Oh yeah, his songs are cool. Oh, we're all loving, maybe it would be too many pats on the back and I wouldn't have pushed as hard, because I think, I don't know how it is for other people, but looking back, it was probably, there's an unhealthy component to why I felt the need to push so hard and make music happen.
Yeah, the chip on the shoulder, man. I mean, that's driven a whole lot of great artists over the years.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah.
Without question, man.
And me also.
Yeah. Hey, man, there's a lot of people who will absolutely put you in that category as well.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
Well, I mean, actually, it's funny you say that because I was going to ask you, the idea of legacy and where you fit into the overall like tapestry of dance music and the music industry and all that. Is that something you think about? Is that something you care about? What your body of work that you're leaving behind? Is that part of what it's about for you?
Yeah. I think the album, thinking a little bit about that probably led me to the album. Because, I feel like I did make a really cool footprint on the dance music scene, especially, in the big room era. I think I was just pumping out some really great songs that, to this day, when I play them, they do feel like classics. I mean, it's a lot of my fans out there. So like, it's hard to say objectively if, like the whole community looks at them like classics, but I think there were definitely some that will stand the test of time. So that is cool to think about my legacy. And, the album, I put out that tweet,
I love that tweet so much, man.
Yeah.
Speaking of DJ Carnage, that tweet gave me strong Carnage vibes.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
Absolutely.
That tweet, I really meant it. Like, I do feel like I created something, not, like at least one of the most unique things that someone has tried to do in dance music. And, I guess I felt like from what I've done in dance music so far with like the amount of songs I put out and, a good amount of them people really took to, I thought that I was in a place to make a statement like that. Like, hey, maybe people will, like give me saying something so crazy a chance because, hey, he's, put in a lot of work. Didn't end up really being the case, but I do still believe that, I think I'm within my rights as long as I've been making dance music and as much work I put into it to, stake the claim that I think I've made something that's really, special here. Maybe even stands among the best of, dance albums. And I still believe that just in terms of what I pushed myself to do in that one. And I think that I ultimately, I probably made that album because I felt I hadn't showed that part of myself yet. And I think that when I think about my legacy in terms of just the music side of it, I probably have a couple more of those albums in me, but I think those will be the things that hopefully define me because I think that they show, rather than just the big EDM, like big room hits, I think they show what I'm capable of. And, that's something we all want to do as musicians. We always feel like we haven't quite showed people what we're capable of yet, right?
That's a good point. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's also the chip on the shoulder thing a little bit is, there's always that voice in the back of your head, right? That's just like, oh, wait till they hear this,
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, exactly. Like, yeah. And then on the flip side of it is the stuff for producers. And I think that, I think my legacy could be in the end, the guy who made producers' lives easier, also with the sample packs and
Oh,
the plugins
100%,
and
man.
stuff.
I was going to say that
Yeah.
and to give you your flowers, absolutely, man, because that's the sample packs. I think people who are just fans of dance music, people who aren't producers, maybe don't realize, but the things you've made, these kick drum samples, these little cinematic loops, whatever they are, I mean, they're in the bones of so many other dance songs that people love.
Yeah.
And, unless you are a super nerdy producer who breaks down, what samples are used in what songs, you would never even
Yeah.
know. But I mean, I don't know, man, maybe even more than the music. Not that the music hasn't also had a big effect, but I think, as far as changing not just the sound of dance music, but the way people are making dance music, I think that's been a huge thing that you've done. Because those
Thank
sample
you, man.
packs, I don't know, man. There's not a lot of other people making samples for artists who spend enough time and care. They're just so unique and they're so universal. I think it's really an accomplishment, man. I know from talking to you how much time you spend on them too.
Yeah, it's a lot. But thank you for saying that. And somebody once asked me what I thought happiness was, and I think I said something to the effect of happiness is being important to the people or thing that is important to you.
Mm.
And producing is the most important thing to me. I mean, I DJ, but producing is where I'm most at home. And I think I'll ultimately be happy if I feel I've left some footprint on the community of producers and the world of producers. So it's something that I'm happy to take a lot of time, to lose a lot of sleep over, to feel that I've left some footprint on the way that people produce music, because it's my passion. It's my one true love. I mean, performing is great. All the other stuff is great, but I just love creating through music on a computer, basically. That sounds so romantic when I say it like that, but it's like I can't. Yeah, I've done it day in and day out for the last 20 years of my life, and to think that I could help people and I'll be remembered for my contributions there. That's enough for me. But the music is a bonus. Also.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the music is fun too. I mean, I think maybe a more romantic way to say that sentiment too is like you're finding connection, like human connection with people through doing this work, right? Like, what you put out, whether it's a sample or a song or, it could change what somebody around the world, how they make music, that could come back. You could hear that later. That might inspire you again. I mean, it's all part of, to me, man, what you're talking about is being a part of a community, like being a contributing member to a community. And I preach on this podcast all the time that for any DJ, any producer, anyone who loves what we do here, that's pretty much the only way to get involved is to start contributing to the community,
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's
definitely.
not just showing up and saying like, look at me, here's why I'm cool. It's like, oh, here's what I've made. Hope you enjoy,
Yeah, definitely. Like, and it's more fun that way too, right? Like half of what we do, aside from like rendering the final song, is the joy of the process and finding new plugins and new techniques. And the easiest way to do that is just to simply share and talk to people. So yeah, it's a really fun community. Yeah, man.
How's the Dharma label going lately? Because I know that's beyond being just a label, is also sort of a collective and a home base for you and producers you work with.
Yeah, no, Dharma has been going great. We put out packs on there. We put out tutorials on there. Yeah, for all of you guys watching, if you haven't seen the website, it's dharmaworldwide.com. And you get tutorials from me. There's like a whole course on the basics of production from me. And it's awesome to have an outlet to put, when I write something down, I'm like, oh, this would be a cool idea. This technique worked out really well for me. I'd love to share it, to put it all in one place. So yeah, Dharma is where we do that on top of putting out people's music. So there's lots of great producers out there who are just trying to get heard and trying to get some kind of platform. And it's awesome to be able to give it to them by putting their songs out on Dharma.
How do you find artists? What do you look for in an artist that you might want to sign to your label? Because I feel like a lot of artists don't know, maybe the best way or the best etiquette to approach a label to send people something.
Yeah,
What's like a turn on or a turn off as far as label stuff goes for you?
right. So on Dharma, we have a demo submissions page where once somebody submits, we have it like super cataloged. Like we can go through in a really organized way, review demos. I could approve it. The rest of the team says, "Oh, I liked it too." Then it makes it to the next stage. We've really got a great system for it. Approaching me personally in any way is not a good idea because I'll probably not see it. Number one, because most of the avenues for communicating with me are filled with other people trying to communicate with me, and I'm just not going to see it. So doing it on Dharma is a way. And you think, well, hey, everyone's submitting on Dharma. Well, that's why we have a subscription and it costs $10 a month. And that pays for, I forget if it's 10, maybe it's a little over 10 or around 10. And it pays for the tutorials to get made, everything else. But it also helps us separate people who are frankly really serious about the production and willing to cough up a couple of copies worth of dollars, to show it. And we review those and guarantee feedback within a certain amount of time. So you can get feedback guaranteed if you are a paid subscriber, and it's really not that expensive. So yeah, that is the best way to do it. And now in terms of the actual content of the kind of music that you're making, the number one thing I could say is don't try to sound like me. That's a thing that people fall into a lot.
Yeah.
And try to, try to think outside of the box. Of course, you want to listen to the trends that are going on right now in music, because the truth is it's usually somebody taking a trend and then putting an interesting spin on it. That makes it obvious for, hey, this could work. If somebody's doing something totally out of left field, it could totally work as well. The only thing that really doesn't work is if it sounds like you chased a trend and you're just an imitation of a trend. That's just not going to work. So if you are going to take a trend, at least try to merge it with something that is a bit unlikely to be merged with that trend. Somebody else hasn't done yet. You put your own spin on it. And then, of course, if you're just sick at making music, then you can do something that has nothing to do with any trends, and we'll appreciate that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. No, that's great advice. And for anybody watching this now, listening back later, the Dharma Sound of Summer compilation dropped not too long ago, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to hear some examples of artists
kind of music,
who made it through the process and people we're talking about, you can check that out as well. Do you have like an overarching plan for Dharma, the label, the collective, like anything you haven't done with it yet that you're wanting to do?
Make lots of money.
Yeah, good luck with that, buddy.
No, I mean, honestly, I think the educational side, I'd like to just really make it better and better. I mean, a tough aspect of it is, taking all these different tutorials, which are absolutely awesome in their own right, and coming up with a system by which somebody can come to Dharma and have some sort of sequence to the way that they're learning. So there's initially I did a big like beginner's introduction to the main concepts of producing, mixing and what the different effects do, time-based effects, reverb, delay, things like that. And that's nice, good sequential, and you know where you left off. But I've made a lot of tutorials where I'm teaching you something really cool and unique, but it's sort of in a sea of other tutorials that I've done. So I think the trick will be to just better the experience for a user to come and know where you left off and be learning in a way that's tailored to you. And that's easier said than done, but we're making incremental improvements. And if this thing just gets better a little bit, every couple of months, then it'll just be fantastic in a few years, right? And we just chip away at our weaknesses, and Yeah.
I like what you said, learning tailored to you, because it makes me think about you talking about yourself in school back in the day, right? And how it wasn't necessarily that you didn't care about the subject matter, but it just wasn't being presented to you in a way that, was sort of compatible with the way your brain works. And certainly that's the kind of thing that I think any creative can relate to, right? I think a lot of people who find themselves with creative jobs or vocations are the ones who maybe, didn't learn so well in traditional school, and trying to approach those people and reach out to those people and say, well, what's the best way to get it into your brain? What's the best way to teach it to you? That's really nice, man. Not a lot of people do that.
Yeah. School, it really fails some people who are totally talented and should feel good about the work ethic they're able to put in and the skills that they have, and they're made to feel bad. And it's a bummer. I was able to make it through, and I feel like I'm one of those people. There's probably a lot of people who don't, and probably are just out there feeling crappy about themselves, and it's really a shame. But yeah, as it pertains to music tutorials, I always like to really cut the fat as much as possible and not expect that you want to hear a bunch of jokes from me or a bunch of, dialogue, and just try to get right to the things I think are interesting and that you can learn from, because you may not learn the same way I learn. And if I can just give you the facts, you can on your own, go through it at a pace that works for you or whatever. But yeah, for all you guys making tutorials out there, your jokes are never as funny as you think they are. And you guys should just fucking give me the meat and potatoes.
On, yeah. Man, so the last time we did this podcast, we kind of randomly stumbled into this as we were wrapping up. And I was wondering if you still did this, just because this was fun. I had asked you something about, is there anything else you wanted to talk about? And you took out your phone and you said that you sometimes just jot down ideas or thoughts or notes. Do you still do that?
Yeah, I still do that.
Would you be willing to read a couple?
Yeah.
That would be amazing. And then, then we just, we got some questions from the people who have been watching as well. But I wanted to make sure, just in case you had some new thoughts.
No, let me see.
And this is just, you just jot these thoughts down kind of anytime you think of them or you encounter them?
Yeah, basically. Anytime I think I'm being smart,
nice.
I think, I sounded smart. So I'll try to write it down.
I like that.
That's really life, is just trying to act like a smart person. It's pretty much, that's my kind of whole MO.
Oh, I've been trying to do that for years, sir.
Did I say this one about buying things with time? Did I say that last time?
I don't even remember, to be honest. It was a few years ago. It was like 2.5 years ago we did that.
Okay, so I have one that is about people who vilify money or say money is the root of all evil, but you really can't get around it. And the reason is that everything you buy, you really are actually just buying with time. And success is just a measure of how much your time is worth.
Mm.
So when somebody pays you a salary, you hate them all you want, but they're just saying, hey, that's how much you're willing to accept for your time, right?
Sure. So and time is also the most valuable commodity in existence, right?
Yeah.
The only thing we can't make more of.
Yeah, you can't make more of it. And also, you'll be giving up all that time if you don't make the right decisions early on, right?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay, here's another one. Music business and life is about knowing when to be forceful and when to be passive. If one or the other was always right, it would be easy. But it's about achieving a middle ground that works for you. And be wary of being too passive, as it will cause you to be a forceful person at the wrong times.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah. Sometimes passive seems like the way to go, but you start harboring all that negative.
Yeah,
shit.
Well, especially, we've been talking a lot about, advice for aspiring artists, people just starting off. I think it can be very easy to be passive when you don't feel you have a lot of agency or clout or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can absolutely be to your detriment in those early years, to just try to smile and say yes to everybody and agree with everybody. And and maybe not advocate for your ideas as much as you should.
That's exactly right. And especially if you are a producer working with a vocalist or collaboratively in some way, you've got to get comfortable with expressing that you don't like the way something is going, and to be able to make suggestions in a voice that works for you. And what I mean by that is you use a tone and you use language that is not going to kill the vibe, because people who are a bit clunky in the way they deliver criticism can really kill the whole energy. They make the other person feel sort of offended. And you're not going to get anywhere with that either. But flip side of that coin, being too passive, is you walk out of a session and you got a song that's crap. You knew it was crap and you didn't say anything about it. And you only have yourself to blame.
And to take it back to your first point, then you've just lost a whole bunch of time, right?
Yeah, you lost a whole bunch of time. Exactly. Because you were being Mr. Nice Guy, right?
Yeah, I love that, man.
Okay, here's one. Don't have a backup plan. It's like carrying two things at the same time. It seems simple. You have two hands, but the second one drops, you'll fumble the other, and vice versa.
Ooh.
I don't know if you've ever tried to carry like two plates at the same time down there, and in the moment that one fumbles, you forget which one is the more important one, and you throw that one. That one's just gone flying now because you're trying to save your burrito over your laptop or something.
Oh yeah, well you're talking to maybe the worst restaurant server of all time, my friend.
Oh, were you one?
Oh, I mean, when I was a kid, like in between, summer job kind of thing, and God damn, I was bad at that.
Dude, I was a busboy, and I had some really bad spills where hot food just dumping all over people. Is that what you're talking about?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I got
so funny.
Yeah. Thank God I found music. Man.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah. Thank God. Okay. In general, I think a weak personality, this is going to sound very judgmental, but a weak personality is not attempting difficult things and being attracted to people who make you feel better about it. And strong is attempting difficult things and enjoying being surrounded by people who question and criticize you.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a balance we all have to strike, because it can be tempting for all of us to want to surround ourselves with people who are sort of supporting our perhaps incorrect view of the world, or sort of inaccurate view of something we've just made. We'd rather hear someone just tell us it's good or something. It's the easier route.
Yeah,
but,
well, and that's, people who sometimes get too much success run into that same problem, right? Because they get surrounded by people who just, tell them they're great, tell them they're, every idea is great because they just want to be near this successful thing. And then that can start to warp the perception of that person, right? And and their work can go downhill. I mean, it cuts both ways. It's an interesting idea, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sure it's something you've already thought about. I feel like this one is pretty intuitive, but
for sure,
you see it happen a lot with people the more successful they get, right? Because there's just more people saying everything they do is great all the time. So,
yeah. And there's pressure to sort of keep doing the same thing because that's what's proven and that's what works. Yeah. I mean, that actually makes me think about your album again, because, I have to imagine that it took some inner push from yourself to put it out there and not to just make, another Kashmir banger that is going to work in the same way the old ones did.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That part of it was scary. But you just have to push through that. But thank you for saying that, though. Yeah, it's funny. I was at dinner, Splice dinner, and this guy told me a story about Kanye West. He said he had a session with Kanye. They were going to work on a song, and Kanye was playing some music, and it was a bunch of guys in there, and everybody was bobbing their head. And then suddenly Kanye just turned all the music off, and he told everyone to get the fuck out of there. He's just like, get the fuck out of here, except for this guy. He's like, you can stay, and can stay. And they're like, all right, man, this is a little awkward, and he's like, you're probably wondering why I kicked all those people out, huh? And he was like, yeah, a little bit. And he was like, because they were giving me fake head bobs. He was like, I knew they were fake head bobs.
Wow.
And he's like, I know this song isn't good enough. And I hate being surrounded by people who give me fake head bobs.
Man.
Yeah. And he was like, you were giving me the fake head bobs too, but we have to work on the song. So
yeah. He's like, I'm stuck with you. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm stuck with you. But I mean, great. He's made as far as he had. You say what you want about his more recent music. That would maybe give you a little bit of a reasonable question into what I'm about to say. But I do think he probably made it as far as he has because he doesn't fall for the hype,
Yeah, absolutely. And what you said earlier too, I mean, I think he is absolutely the kind of person who wants to surround himself as much as possible with people who will challenge him, with people who won't just agree to whatever he says. And, that's maybe one of his biggest strengths. You were talking about people like, Diplo earlier, is that, he can bring all these different people together, these different sounds, these different ideas, and be open and sort of not, like, obviously he has a big ego, but then also in the creation process, it seems like he's figured out how to take the ego out of it in an interesting way,
Yeah. I mean, I think that he's found, I think that, truly industrious hustlers, they'll leave their ego out of it for the creation of something they believe in, and you get the right people together and it'll be a collaboration and you have to, you'll have this, you might have 4 producers on it, 3 writers or whatever, but you believe in the outcome. And it is absolutely a skill to be able to visualize the outcome and be willing to incorporate as many people to help you as needed to make it a reality.
Yeah, that's a huge key, man. Wow, people from all over the world have been submitting some questions here. And I'll run through a few of them. They don't all have to be like necessarily long answers like we've been doing. If it's a short answer, that's totally fine too. Diego from Mexico is asking, we touched on this to a certain extent, but he says, my question is, what or who inspired you to make Harmonica Andromeda? Like, was it a single idea? Was it sort of just a feeling over time? Like, where did the seed of that idea come from?
Well, I knew a while ago I wanted to make an album, and I think the most inspiring thing to me at that point, it got complicated because I took much inspiration from so many places. But at its origin, the Gladiator soundtrack, and specifically "Now We Are Free" and the 3 songs surrounding that by Hans Zimmer, was to me so beautiful that I wanted to make a whole album that gave me the feeling that that sequence did. And that led to songs like The World We Left Behind and The Little Voice. So that was big inspiration there. Stuff like Harmonica Andromeda was Beatles, and for the benefit of Mr. Kite, probably with that one. If you guys remember Sgt. Pepper's, they had this like kind of like a circus sort of song, which is really cool. Definitely took inspiration there. Western movies, which have been a big obsession of mine because of how they incorporate not only American culture and Native American culture, but also Italian culture, because there was a long period where Italians took this great interest, I guess, in Western movies, were funding the creation of Western movies, and guys like Ennio Morricone were scoring these Western movies. So it's an awesome marriage of all these different cultures that inspired me to do songs like, oh my God, I'm blanking on. I know what I called it in my project. Blood in the Water. Yeah, Blood in the Water. So there's inspiration. I think, if The Little Voice was a bit Queen inspired with Bohemian Rhapsody, and hey, could it be pulled off to have such diverse in terms of the energy and in terms of the melodies, and even do a key change in one song? Could that be done in a dance song? And that was what I aspired to do with The Little Voice. Song of War was probably inspired by a little bit of Mick Gordon and the Doom soundtrack. And, I got in trouble for sampling some of his stuff. And
I remember, we talked about that. Yeah.
One comment always left a bad taste in my mouth that said, I know KSHMR didn't make these. He's not capable as a producer. He's not good enough to.
There's the chip on the shoulder again, man. Yeah.
I wanted to do something really nasty, and that's where Song War. I don't know if it's as good as Mick, but that's where that came out of. And and there's more scattered throughout the album, but I think those are a lot of the main influences. I'd say Beatles, Queen. I think it was and Dr. Dre for Mystical Beginning. Was,
interesting.
He was probably my biggest influence as a producer when I was growing up. And I wanted to do, what did KSHMR and Dr. Dre and maybe a little Daft Punk all sound like together?
That's interesting, man. Yeah, I got to go back and listen to it now, knowing that. All right, so switching gears a little bit. This is a question from Jordan Dub 3, who, this is actually a pretty interesting question. He says, I work with a small artist who is incredible, but struggles finishing music. It's almost like he has too many ideas, that it's hard for him to come back to the old ones, or he feels uninspired to do it. I know it's not uncommon for artists to not finish a lot of ideas, but this seems like an extreme case of it. And do you have any advice for him?
He manages an artist?
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah. The easiest solution would be to get another producer to take the idea and flesh it out. And, that has a stigma attached to it of ghost producing, but I think that if you've started an idea and you've already added a lot of input into it, to get somebody to take a fresh look at it, it can oftentimes be very simple for them to say, oh, well, here's how you would structure it out, or here, So to get basically the energy of another producer involved can be the answer to really quickly finding a solution to something. Sometimes you're working on something, you can't figure it out, and then somebody else comes in the room, you start talking, and it's like crystal clear what you should do with it.
Yeah.
So I would if he knows another talented producer that would be willing to help out, or like even pay him for his time to help you add some structure to these songs and get them closer to a finished project. I think it's worth it, and I don't think you should feel bad about it.
No, I agree, man. And I think even whether it's paid or not, whether it's just, sending a folder of ideas to somebody you want to collaborate with, seeing if they resonate with any of them, all that can be that's a great answer, man. That's a great way to sort of reinvigorate old ideas.
Yeah. And our brain is we've got like the monkey brain and we've got the human brain, and the monkey brain doesn't always do what we want it to, depending on what side of the bed we wake up on. And so you can create, carrots like you put in front of a horse to keep it walking, or a donkey, whatever. And if those carrots are somehow, adding incentives for you to finish things, I don't know what that means. Like you can't use the internet until this thing is done, or whatever. You can't play games. You can try that too. I find with songs, it's like not as easy to do that as with something like going to the gym or something, finishing a song. Right. It's like, it's more complicated, but it's worth trying that as well. Like creating a system that is basically, it allows your monkey, it's an environment that will make the results come from your monkey brain, whatever that means for you, creating some kind of schedule or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, man. That's a great answer. Okay, next question. This is also interesting, and it's fairly open-ended, so feel free to take this any way you want. Luke Meltart, shout out to Luke, is just asking, can you talk about your perspective on alcohol? That's all the question said.
My perspective on alcohol. I'm not a big drinker, but I'll drink at shows, especially before I go on. It's kind of a ritual. Take a shot or two before I go on stage, just to kill some of the nerves. But yeah, generally, I'm not a super big fan of alcohol. I've had some alcoholism in my family, and I'm just not.
Yeah.
I'm not. I don't get a lot out of it on like a normal day. If I'm partying with my friends, I could see we're all drinking, makes sense. But yeah, I'm just not a big drinker.
Yeah. I was kind of the same as you, man. Like it was never something I had to cut out entirely from my life, but it's also not. I've just never felt, that drawn to it.
Yeah, we're lucky to be in that way.
Yeah, I think we're very lucky, especially how easy it is to access alcohol in our line of work.
Yes. Yeah. Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah. This is okay. So this is kind of related to what we were talking about. This is Yavuz from Turkey. I hope I'm saying that name right, Yavuz, and says, he says, "Hi, Kashmir. I am unmotivated to do hard work. What do you do when you get mentally depressed or unmotivated?" And Yavuz thinks of you as an example for hard work.
Okay. Well, I mean, so first of all, you've got to make sure that you're just showing up and trying to do it. And you don't allow yourself to say, well, I wasn't inspired today, so I'm going to go do something else. You got to be at the faucet to be there when the water comes out and catch it. And when you get in a rhythm, it starts coming out more consistently, but just make sure you're there. And so nobody could say you're not trying hard enough. And the second thing I would say, we can often get uninspired when we get deeper into a song and everything that's required to really make, a 2-bar loop into a song. It can take out the excitement that happens to everybody. I would say for a week, I've done this before quite a few times. I'll go rent like a little Airbnb or something, and I'll just pump out ideas there. And I'll force myself to make like 3 or 4 ideas every day. And when I say ideas, they're just like 4 bars, and it could be like a cool sound doing a cool melody with some chords underneath, maybe some drums if I'm inspired. But I keep myself on the schedule that no matter what, every few hours, I've got to move on to the next thing. And I've walked away from doing that just feeling like I have so many ideas and feeling just like I'm an absolute champion, and then going back and picking the ones that, were worth pursuing and fleshing those out. But, a lot of that stagnation and sort of depression in your work ethic can come from getting invested in something too much that you're questioning if it's even worth it.
Yes.
It's just like a weird purgatory to put yourself in. So having like a marathon of just how many tracks you can make in a short amount of time, it's a great exercise. And that's how I came up with the album. Most of the songs in the album were born out of me doing just that.
Oh, really? That's cool, man.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I do that sometimes too. I think that's a great piece of advice. Just to unstick yourself from whatever you're stuck on. It can be refreshing just to remind yourself that, you have infinite ideas in your head. You can always generate more ideas. You just sort of have to break yourself out of whatever mindset you're in.
Exactly. But it does definitely help to change something like, the scenery or whatever. That's, I think, an important aspect of it too, if you can do that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Just a couple more here. Achilles from Melbourne, shout out to Melbourne, is asking, this is another extremely open-ended question. He just says, the music industry is moving so quickly in 2021. What's next? which I guess I would maybe modify a little bit to just say, is there anything going on in the industry or in your own career right now that you're particularly excited about? Any new energy you're paying attention to?
That's a tough one. I think more understated, cool house music is like something I definitely like. When I go to festivals now, I like to take time away from the main stage and go check those out because there's something really fresh about that scene to me.
Yeah.
I honestly, I don't have too much more other than that. It is kind of a weird time. There's a lot of music coming out that's like super popular that I don't like. So it's like, I feel a bit like, I'm just not a good authority right now to say.
Yeah, well, and those are those peaks and valleys we were talking about earlier, right? That you're not always going to be totally in sync with every single trend and movement that happens. And it's what you said, it's riding those waves and figuring out, where you stand at the end of it that sort of determines, how long you stick around, I think. Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with being like, well, I'm not really feeling the popular thing right now, but, I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Maybe you're just meant to wait it out a little bit.
You're right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And spend, like we were saying before, just spend that time wisely, you know?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That time money.
That time money is right. Well, yeah, no, that's it, man. I don't have anything else. You got anything else? Any note we should leave it on?
Nah. Can't wait to see you guys at shows, and I hope they become possible soon. And yeah, it's just back to making new music.
Yeah, can't wait to see you again in person, man. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and thank you for doing this.
Yeah. Thank you so much, man. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, great to talk to you, man. Peace.
Peace.